Downtown Radio News, Ivan Little reporting. Reports are coming in of a bomb explosion at a hotel on the outskirts of Belfast. The bomb exploded at the Le Mans House Hotel near Cumber a short time ago, and first reports say there may be a number of casualties. Eyewitnesses say the explosion started a fierce fire, which spread quickly through the building, which was packed with hundreds of people attending dinner dances. It's understood a fleet of ambulances is on its way to the scene. It was from these studios 10 years ago tonight that, as a duty news editor here at Downtown Radio, I read that bulletin, the first news about the Le Mans explosion. At first, none of us knew the scale of the massacre. At first, the police thought that only 2 people had been killed. But as the night wore on, that death toll rose to 12, making it one of the worst atrocities ever in the province. But like so many outrages in Ulster, outrages like McGurk's, outrages like Claudy, Le Mans has now largely been forgotten, overtaken by fresh carnage, fresh horrors. Tonight, however, we recall the Le Mans nightmare, a living nightmare for those who survived and for relatives of those who died. Set amid the peaceful rolling hills of Castlereagh, the owners and staff at the Le Mans House Hotel always felt that they were a million miles away from the battlefields of Belfast, even though in reality they were only on their doorstep. But on the 17th of February 1978, the Provisionals brought the troubles home to Le Mans, blasting the hotel with a bomb the likes of which had never been seen before here. The blast incendiary, an explosive device attached to a can of petrol, had first been used here 3 months earlier, but the Le Mans bomb was even deadlier, containing 1 pound of explosives and 4 petrol containers. The RUC later carried out tests to simulate the blast, tests which showed the full horror of the bombing, creating a fireball 40 feet in height and 60 feet in diameter. The simulated explosion had been outdoors. The real thing at Le Mans had been indoors in the confined space of the Peacock Room, where 45 members of the Irish Collie Club and their friends had just finished their starter at their annual dinner dance.
The bomb went off and it came like a ball of fire, just from the bottom of the room right up the centre. It just looked like a huge ball, big orange ball.
There was pandemonium and carnage as the fireball engulfed the Peacock Room.
My friend, she was just charred. There was nothing there. And all the bodies.
Lynn Coulter, seen here in hospital the day after the explosion, remembers being at first strangely mesmerised by the fireball.
I remember looking over to my right and there was a dance floor laid on the floor for that purpose, and there were all these flames all over it, and I remember thinking at the time that it was beautiful because they were all different colours and they were all about 2 inches long and they were just dancing all over the floor. And then all of a sudden self-preservation took over. I realised if I didn't get out of this I was going to die, and people were just pushing and shoving and everyone was trying to get out, and they would have walked over you to get out. And I reached where the kitchen door was and I passed out then, but luckily I passed out and fell into the kitchen out of the room. When we got out, we went into the big function room, and there was another girl there. She had a long dress on her with a zip right down the back, a metal zip. And the zip was it was burning into her back, and she got her husband to lift a carving knife off one of the tables and cut the zip out of her because it was just hurting that much.
One last person was brought out alive. Lily McDowell had become separated from her husband as he tried to guide her through the inferno.
Lily got up and she was holding on to the tail of my coat. But what I remember then about it was there was a girl who seemed to have her hair on fire, and I took my coat off at that time for to put over her head, and in doing so, Lily let go of my coat. So naturally enough, I lost contact with Lily at that stage, and I didn't know where she was.
I just crept away from the tables and I just didn't know where to go. Everything was filled with smoke, and I knew I was going to die. I suddenly just knew that I only had literally seconds. And I sat up on my knees and I tried to as quickly as I could, say my prayer. And as I done so, I just suddenly, I know now that it was just the presence of the Lord spoke to me, and it just was so still. I was able to sit up on my knees and put my hands together, and I was able to say the Lord's Prayer from beginning to end without faltering at all. And after that, I just fell forward on my face. I had asked the Lord that if it was in His will that He would take me home because I was suffering so much. And I asked Him to let Billy out to look after my boys, the 2 boys. The next thing I remember, I was being dragged by my foot and my ankle. I felt somebody holding my ankle. I was dragged through the door into the open air.
Firemen who were at Le Mans within minutes could do nothing to stop the blaze.
Morning, gentlemen.
Alec Withers was the first officer on the scene.
I'm satisfied that even had the appliances been sitting in the car park when the device, with all its devastation, went off, it would have been impossible to do anything to the people who were contained in the incident.
There had never been a bomb like that before?
Not to my knowledge, no. Not one that spread a fireball with such a rapid intensity. It would appear to have had all the effect of, the only thing I could liken it to is perhaps Vietnam, where someone used a flamethrower or napalm or something like that.
The dead and injured were taken to the Ulster Hospital at Dundonald. The bodies were so badly burnt that the first doctor to see them didn't realise they were human.
Lying on the floor of the ambulance were what looked like 3 charred logs, about 4 feet long, maybe a couple of feet wide. And at first I just didn't register what they were. So I went over and I touched one, and my finger went into, I suppose, 1.5 inches deep. And I suddenly hit something hard, and I realised that this was a human being. But it was quite unrecognisable as such. So I rapidly closed the door and went out and inquired what the other 2 ambulances contained. And I was given to understand that it was the same thing.
The RUC used one of the charred bodies on a poster designed to shock people into giving information about the bombers. The posters were eventually withdrawn because relatives discovered whose body it had been. The body illustrated, however, just how gruesome a task it would be to positively identify the victims. A clergyman liaised between the families and forensic experts.
On the Saturday, I spent quite a lot of time trying to get samples of clothing, of hair from brushes, dental records, so that it would help the forensic people with identification. But when I arrived at the mortuary on the Saturday afternoon, the inspector who was in charge of the case invited me to come in. I think he wanted to let me know just that what I was doing was almost a meaningless exercise. When one went into the mortuary and saw what had been a short time before human beings, it was just too horrific to recount, and it would be insensitive to go into the details of it.
It was later established that 3 married couples were among the 12 dead. As the first of the funerals were taking place, the IRA eventually admitted what everyone had known, that they had planted the bomb, but their statement said they hadn't intended to kill anyone.
In sure and certain hope of the resurrection unto the life everlasting.
Eamon Malley, who was the first reporter at Le Mans, later researched the bombing for a book about the provisionals.
The bomb gang came here, planted the bomb, and then made good their getaway. Now, they went to a telephone box which is in the area here, and they discovered that the box had been vandalized and they couldn't get their phone call through to give a warning. They travelled further up the road and they ran into a UDR checkpoint. And now they weren't stopped at the checkpoint, but there was a queue of cars, and as a result of that they were delayed. They were eventually flagged on, and by the time they got to the next telephone box, they'd just got 9 minutes exactly to give the warning, but by that time it was hopelessly late.
No, there was no warning relayed to us. About 5 minutes later, after we'd ran around the place and I had rang and things, the police rang us on a call box and said, "There's a bomb." We said the bomb's already went off. So, and we'd already rang to say that the bomb had went off.
As we bring today in the name of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ.
The public response to the bombing, demonstrations on the streets to coincide with the funerals, and the setting up of an appeal fund to help the survivors and the bereaved, a fund which eventually topped £135,000. But money alone couldn't compensate people like Lily McDowell for their ordeals. Mrs. McDowell was the most seriously injured of the survivors.
I had 50% third-degree burns, first-degree burns to my face.
Not your face.
My face and my neck.
And from your neck down.
My ears.
It's just not the physical side of things. For about 5 years after it, Lily has been in and out of hospital, getting skin grafts done. She's had 2 or 3 nervous breakdowns. And these are things that people don't ever see or realise. Even some of your own family don't realise it.
I think only for the skills of the burns unit, they've done an absolutely marvellous job. It's just a miracle, really. Anyone that had seen me then would say I was just a different person.
People looking at Lily now and just seeing her face, which thankfully come out of it fairly well. If they were in a position to see her stripped off, it'd be a different matter.
We had 8 patients admitted on that occasion. There were 4 of them with burns of about 30% of their body surface, and mostly the whole thickness of the skin was burned. And there were 4 other patients who had burns mainly of their hands. We commonly have 1 or 2 people admitted, say, from a house fire at the same time. But I think in my experience in Northern Ireland, this is the only time we've had 8 people come in at one time. And this obviously produced a certain amount of problems in the organisation of the treatment.
Rita and Ernie Crawford, who both walked uninjured from the blast, lost their only daughter Elizabeth and their son-in-law Ian McCracken at Le Mans. They've now picked up the shattered pieces of their lives and have re-established themselves as top collie breeders. But Mrs. Crawford says she's gone through hell.
Our whole lives completely changed because Elizabeth was our only daughter, only child. And it's only natural that if you have 2 people in your life 1 minute and the next minute they've gone, you just don't know how it's going to affect you. For us, the whole of 1978 was really a blank year. I can honestly say that it was months before I started to come round.
The Crawford's son-in-law, who'd been critically injured in a car crash 2 years beforehand, had, it later emerged, actually escaped from the blaze, but went back inside in search of his wife. Friends and relatives tried to keep that fact from the Crawfords.
Quite a lot of members knew this and people, but it wasn't until there was a trial and we had to attend that trial, and that was when we did learn that Ian had been out and had got a torch from the receptionist and went in screaming for his wife, Elizabeth, but he didn't return out.
Like so many of the survivors of Le Mans, the Crawfords decided to leave Northern Ireland after the blast, but theirs was a vain attempt to find a new life.
We sold our home and packed up and went. And I suppose maybe for the 6 months in a new home, a new environment, we felt, oh, this was it. But again, after another while, we still kept going down the hill, and we stayed 2 years. We thought, we've left all our friends back home, and our home was still empty over there. The wound was still the same. So during the year 1982, we contemplated a house purchase back in our native land, which materialised about September of 1982. And on the 17th of December 82, we arrived home, and we were glad to get back again because we knew that Northern Ireland was still sweet to us despite what had happened.
But other survivors like Lynn Bennett, who suffered serious burns, got out of the province and stayed out. She and her husband Trevor now live in Canada, but are still too distressed to talk about Le Mans. Valerie Geddes had been planning to leave the province. After she was badly burned at Le Mans, she moved to Wales with her husband John. Roy McGee had stayed in touch with all the injured.
Some of them, of course, as you probably are aware, have left the province altogether. They just couldn't live on here after what had happened. And it's quite obvious that the people who went did so because they couldn't face living in the province after what they had come through.
Other younger lives were also torn apart by the blast. Gordon and Joan Crothers, who both died in the fire, had a 2-year-old daughter. Now aged 12, she's been brought up by her widowed grandfather. Andrea Nilsson and her younger sister Melanie were orphaned as teenagers after their parents Dorothy and Paul Nilsson were killed at Le Mans. Both girls now live in England. They have only fading memories of their parents and what happened at Le Mans.
I was babysitting next door and I was watching the last news bulletin and saw that there had been a fire at Le Mans. Well, I didn't think any more of it. But then the people I was babysitting for came home and said that Mum and Dad had been there. This really didn't mean much because I thought they'd be safe. And then as the night went on, they didn't come home and there was no news of them. Reverend McGee, he arrived at the house to see if they had come home under their own steam, as it were, and they hadn't. So we sat up all night, really just waiting for some news, and in the morning realised that they hadn't come home, they weren't in hospital and they weren't going to come home, but they were trying for a whole week to positively identify my mum and dad, and I, from what I remember, it was by a process of elimination that the identification was made. Well, I remember my parents at our country cottage in the Arts Peninsula, and also coming to the Ormeau Park with my mum at weekends when we used to visit my granda. We used to come up here for a go on the swings and for a walk around the park and get some fresh air, and just mainly messing about.
For the survivors, the horror of that February night 10 years ago will never dim. Many of them still find it difficult to go out socially.
I'm very, very dubious about going to hotels or out for a meal or anything like that. I just have no inclination to want to go at all. I'm frightened when I'm in a closed space, closed room. Just after Christmas there, we had a nephew married, and as I would confirm, we were at the reception and finished our meal when the alarm bell went off. It just triggered something off in my mind. I just don't know what happened. I just jumped from the table and was screaming and ran.
I used to be that I loved going out. I would have any chance of a dinner dance and I would have been away. But now I just don't really enjoy going out, especially at night. I don't mind now. I can go out during the day, go into a strange place, and although I'm uneasy, as long as it's bright outside, I'm okay. But at night, I just don't feel easy at all. It was, even for 2 years after it, I couldn't go to bed and turn the light out and go to sleep. I had an awful fear of waking up in the dark. And it got so bad that even though I had a light on, I still wasn't content, and I didn't sleep until dawn broke.
They didn't lose any relatives or staff in the blast, but the owners of Le Mans did lose their livelihood. However, they quickly made up their minds to rebuild their hotel business.
Immediately after the explosion, we decided that there were so many people would be out of work, including my own family and myself, that we would try and open in some kind of temporary measure in the old farmhouse. So it was really going to be back to the old farmhouse days of catering. Sometimes at night you would have thought, well, I wonder is it really worthwhile? But when you saw all the rest of the employees coming round saying, what can I do? Can we do this? Can we do that? Then you get great hope to go ahead.
But the name Le Mans had become synonymous almost with tragedy. Did you ever think of changing the name, making a new start?
Yes, we had thought of that, and especially when they called the bomb the Le Mans bomb. It was a bit devastating. But on the other hand, this old farmhouse was built by James Le Mans in 1794, and it was history. And I think when you write the history of a place, you would want to keep the original names, and we just decided to plough on. That was it. That would be Le Mans House.
Good afternoon, Le Mans House Hotel.
Lynn Coulter has been able to revisit the new Le Mans during the day, but other survivors cannot and will not return. Even the doctor who saw the dead and injured at the Ulster Hospital has never been there.
It's the sort of thing that you can see every day that you think about it. And I have passed Le Mans on several occasions since, but I've never had the courage to put my foot through the door. It brings back unpleasant memories of a night that really I hope I never see again.
At the time of Le Mans, amid the public outcry over the barbarity of the bombing, a number of commentators predicted that the atrocity would be a watershed in the Troubles. But even though it was a major blow to the IRA, it didn't stop them.
Well, a senior Republican actually told me that in the wake of Le Mans, they felt that they were finished. But as history has shown, they weren't finished. And at the time, to test whether the support had dwindled that drastically, they had a march in West Belfast, and they felt somewhat reassured, I'm told, by the turnout. But it was a very worrying point for them, and many of them thought that they couldn't recover simply because of the scale of the loss of civilian life, and these people were totally innocent. And one of the most significant things was that the IRA took a decision shortly afterwards. The Army Council decided to terminate all commercial bombings on premises like this, and the graph of violence in Northern Ireland will show that they adhered to that particular ruling.
Whenever Le Mans happened, people said, well, this will stop it, this will change everything, they'll come to their senses, and it just went on. I mean, there have been disasters since, and Enniskillen's one of them, and it's nearly forgotten about already.
The IRA's apology for the Lamon massacre was rejected by survivors at the time and still is. Few of them can forgive or forget.
If they could see that, and if they had to go and identify someone belonging to themselves in the state that those bodies were in, maybe they'd realise what they're doing, and maybe they'd stop it.
An apology for something that shouldn't have happened isn't really an apology at all, and it shouldn't have happened, and no apology can take it away.
In the Lord's own time, He will deal with these people. I think justice will be done. Maybe not by the courts here or whatever, but when their time comes to leave this world, that I think we all have to face the judgment seat.
I know Lily doesn't like me saying this, but I feel better, not the Roman Catholics, because we have plenty of Roman Catholic friends. I feel bitter to the people who planted the bomb and all bombs, but I'm also very bitter to the politicians on both sides, because I feel that they helped to keep the troubles going.
I don't feel any anger or bitterness or hatred, mainly because if I felt that anger, it would take something away from my life, and I want to live my life to the full now, and I feel that they would actually be hurting me more by making me feel bitter for the rest of my life.
It's not a matter of feeling bitter, but as one of the ministers had asked me after Le Mans, would I forgive them? I said no. For simple reasons. They won't repent. So therefore, God would not forgive them because they won't repent. But however, that's for them and their lives, not for me. We both have lost the joys of life. We lost Elizabeth in the end. And I think of a lovely home they had, only 18 months married. If she had been killed or met with an accident, it may not have been so bad. But the trouble was standing outside that building and watching it burning with your daughter being burned to death. It was really horrible to think of it. And at times it comes back on us very often, but we have to live with it.